great. We just, someone just put something in the chat, and I think I'll read it while we wait so you can ponder this question, and then I'll read it again. Dear Raymond, I'm wondering if either in your book or here with us in this webinar, you will be addressing the connection between your work with near-death experiences and your work in the Psychomanteum.
Hmm.
So,
Yes, I can do that next time.
yeah.
Next time, I'm going to talk about God and relationship to creation and creativity. And I can,
Probably, I'm sorry.
that's the psychomanteon is really, I think, closely related to the experience of creativity. Not saying that it's a figment of the mind, but more that everything is a figment of the mind. My way.
Raymond, could you just define for people who may not know about your Psychomanteon work? Oh, someone just asked, by the way. For people who may not know what the Psychomanteum is, could you maybe say a few words about what it is?
Well, all my friends and relatives know that I am just about the worst bore in the world, because all of the things I talk about are things that I got interested in as a student of ancient Greek philosophy, and which is the most incredible story of history, folks, believe it or not, is the story of ancient Greek philosophy and how the entire Western intellectual tradition was laid down over a period of 280 years. And by experiences today we would call shamanism. I mean, this is just immense. And when I was an undergraduate, I learned that if you go back to the time of Plato, what the average person on the street thought that a philosopher was that a philosopher was a person who probes into things up in the air and probes into things down under the earth. And the air was out of body travel, right, or magical flight, and the other, probing into things down underneath the earth, was calling up the spirits of the dead, which was just institutionalized in ancient Greek society in the form of oracles of the dead. And these places were enormously influential in the development of logic and the development of Western thought. In reality, you can't understand how Western thought came about unless you think about the role that these oracles of the dead, places you could go and call up the spirits of your dead relatives. Well, and I knew about this history, and then in 1988, I read an article about the excavation of the most famous of the oracles of the dead, the one in Epirus in the northwest corner of Greece on the river Acheron. And based on what the archaeologists found there, I figured out how they were doing it, and it works. And basically, the Psychomanteon is a structure where you have a optical clear depth. They did it with a bronze cauldron, highly polished on the inside and filled with water and a layer of olive oil, so it creates a depth. But, my house wouldn't bear a 5,000 pound cauldron filled with water, so I just used a wall mirror, and you put a wall mirror in a little chamber that you exclude the light, and you go through a process. This is the most important part of it. It's not like something that just happens. You have to go through a process of thinking about your deceased relatives and so on, and talking. I talk with them for about an hour or two. And then you go into this chamber, and under those circumstances, many people, it's about 60% on the first attempt, will have an experience which they interpret to be a visitation from a departed loved ones. So that's what an oracle of the dead is. And I recreated this, and it's not just me, there's numerous other scholars that have recreated this, and it's been written up by many other scholars who read my piece and then recreated it. So that's what a psychomanteon is. And I don't do it anymore because I am not a good psychotherapist. I am a thinker, right? And but I've taught psychotherapists how to do this, and people who can really get involved with the feelings of people and so on, they have really good success with this. And it was used in the past as a therapy for grief, uh, you know, severe grief.
And we've done
So,
workshops together, Raymond, in the past, and I've always been very surprised by the kinds of experiences people have had in the Psychomantheon, having certain types of apparitional experiences, and also, as you said, sort of creative and inspiring cross-dimensional experiences too, that are not just seeing apparitions of beloveds necessarily. But we're actually in the process of creating an online course based on one of the workshops we did about maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago. So when that's available, we'll let you know more. But many people have had really positive experiences in the Psychomantium. So again, welcome everyone. And I am Lisa Smart here with my friend and colleague and mentor, Dr. Raymond Moody. And before we start today to talk about the next kind of installment of God is Bigger Than the Bible, I was only able to track down one question. So I just wanted to make sure if I missed anybody's questions this week, or just resend them and we'll do them next month. And I ask you just a brief, just for this favor, make sure in the subject line, if you send us a question, just say question for webinar. Because we get hundreds of emails literally a week. And so it'd be a lot easier if you could just put that in the subject line. And I also will be sure not to miss it, because I'm heartbroken if I've missed any questions. But if I have, we'll get to it next month. We do have one. The question's a little long, but it's interesting. It's from Diane, and Diane is a near-death experiencer. And she says, I don't think any of us who have had near-death experiences really experience God or Source. We just went up a level beyond our own experience. I believe we're just scratching the surface, even in near-death experiences. In the infiniteness of God, just a drop of water in a huge ocean. When I read your work and that of Newton and Eben Alexander and so many people, I begin to think we need to rewrite our spiritual knowledge and history. How would you propose to tell a different story that is inclusive yet allows for some guidance?
you know, that's a very good question. And obviously, I'm on that wavelength and trying that. But also, I would acknowledge, as you did there too, that this is just far beyond the capacity of the human mind. I mean, I've had a personal experience with God several times. You know, I just feel like I was there in the presence of God. That was kind of a fundamental fact of my life. And at the same time, if you try to put that in terms of comprehension or understanding, it's no way. It's William James and his characterization of mystical experiences. He had four characteristics. The first being the ineffability. People say that however articulate they are, they just can't describe it to us, right? And then the other one, the next one was passivity. It's like you can do things to stir up a mystical experience. You can do the chants or do the dances or whatever people do, or go out into nature. But once the mystical experience starts, you are a passive. It's just totally passive. So I just couldn't even stand up, as I mentioned to you earlier. I just collapsed because it's overpowering. And immediately in that situation, you become aware that comprehension is not what this is all about. So I am not on the path to comprehending God. Although I think that we can do things. A lot of our hang-ups are things that, well, maybe I should start what I'm going to talk about, because that it fits right in. And so I want to say at the beginning here, thank you all so much for this opportunity to be with you in this way. And because this is what I like to do, is think about things like this. And stimulus I'm getting from your questions and your presence. I just greatly appreciate it. And I want to talk today about God and justice. And to begin with the experience of immersion. You know, life is an experience of immersion. You're just totally swept up in it. And I think that some of us have different capacities to step out of that immersion a little bit. And so the experience of immersion is something that over the years and lecturing and teaching and so on, I think most people I've found the experience of immersion that they are most familiar with, that immediately they relate to, and I'm sure a lot of people will relate to this, it's the experience of being immersed in a book, right? Or absorbed in a book when you're a kid and you're just in this other world, and it takes a lot of stimulus to rouse you out of that. And what generally disrupts the experience of immersion, or at least one thing that does, is a change of context. And let me sort of describe from a personal experience I've had over the last few weeks what this is all about. I have been, for the last 3 weeks, I have been really, really sick. Okay, now, before you get feeling sorry for me, let me explain my take on this. I have essentially 2 incurable illnesses. One, autoimmune thyroiditis, which I was diagnosed with 40 years ago, which accounts for the splotchy pigmentation. And then the one I was diagnosed with about a year ago is pernicious anemia. Okay, and sometimes when these illnesses, they phase together and they, you know, it just hits you once. So for the last 3 weeks, I have been sick. Okay, now, what, I'm so fortunate that I had a year of working in geriatrics in residency, okay? And so my recollections from that of how people who were my age now then, how many of them complained about their illnesses, right? And that's a common way that people relate to illnesses. And well, I don't complain about illnesses because what I realized a long time ago, even when I was a medical student, is, and this will be obvious to you, as counterintuitive as it seems, but what an illness is an altered state of consciousness. Think about it. Even a cold, it alters your consciousness. Your conscious perspective is displaced to the back of your throat, right? That, and you see everything through that. And every illness, I used to sit with my patient and ask them what the inner world of that illness was. So illnesses are altered states of consciousness. And so during the year I did geriatrics, I had a recurring experience, quite a number of patients over that period of time with pernicious anemia. And I used to listen to these patients and I was like, oh, what's that like, and so on. And there was always a big question mark. You know, no matter how long I would listen to those people and try to figure this out, there was a big hole there in my understanding of this, because I could hear their words, but what they were talking about, I didn't really know. Well, now that I have pernicious anemia, all of that words that I've stored in my mind from those people now come back, and I say, aha, aha. So to me, what other people complain of as an illness is an exciting experience of comprehension of the world. It's like part of my medical education that was left incomplete is now complete, because I see it from the other side of what my patients told me, okay? So, what I'm getting at here is that now this only goes so far. Talking about immersion, I mean, I can have my pernicious anemia and autoimmune thyroiditis and experience it, the uncomfort of it, but I can also sort of get outside of that framework and experience it from the other context, right, of the learning part. But this only goes so far. I mean, I've had kidney stones too, right? And I don't imagine that I could have an experience of not being immersed in the experience of a kidney stone, right? Okay, so there's limits here. But a near-death experience involves a radical change of context in the way, kind of analogously to the way that my being like a person with pernicious anemia has changed my perspective, because rather than just being totally immersed, I can go back to the cognitive parts, like the things that I heard from my patients. So so for that reason, the pernicious anemia is, I mean, it's just there. It's a fascinating phenomenon. But like I said, I'm not talking as though I were having a kidney stone now, right? That's a totally different take. But what I noticed repeatedly, and have noticed from the very first that I began to hear these things back in the 60s, was that I noticed that that it involves a radical change of context and how often people expressed astonishment that things they were so sure of in this world, that seemed so real in this immersive experience of life, that as soon as they were out,
Is it us? Are we frozen or?
I can see you moving, so
Yeah,
it's on his end.
it's on his end. Oh, what do you suggest?
Probably give him a call.
Yeah. So it looks like we're having technical difficulties. I'm going to give Raymond and his son a call. We apologize. We'll get right to it. Thanks, everyone. Take a deep breath, and we'll be right back with you. Go get some iced tea.
Oh, now he's gone. No, he's totally gone. Oh, wait, he's back.
Can we hear? Hi, we were just having some technical difficulties. Are you back on? How does it look? Could you ask Sam?
He's back.
All righty. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
He just needs to unmute him.
How are we
Just
doing?
to unmute him.
Is he muted?
He just needs. There. It's back.
Thanks for your patience, everyone. Thank you. So sorry about that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I think we're okay. Or are we?
Can
Can you hear us, Sam? Maybe maybe he's not hearing on the other side, huh?
Can you hear us now?
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks so much, Sam.
Just get the message. The host is not on.
The best says the host is not, that went away. Okay, so, I was talking about my friend George Rich, who told me that he had been raised in a very fundamentalist Presbyterian environment. And he said, in that context, the very worst thing you could do was any kind of sexual impropriety, right? That would for sure get you to hell. So there was George, 20 years old, pronounced dead of double lobar pneumonia. 9 minutes without, at least 9 minutes his cardiac arrest lasted. So George said, suddenly there he was in the presence of a being he identified as Christ. And he said, all these things he had done, because he said at the age of 20, he had had a very active sexual career. And he said, and not all of it with the opposite sex. Okay, and I remember exactly when he was telling us this. And he said, there all these things were. The things right there in this life review, all of these things all around him. And so there he was with Christ, who was looking at all this just as he was. And I wish I could show you the look on George's face. And he said, George said, and he didn't even mention them. And that's what people say, that there is this radical change of context, that things seem so obvious within this immersive experience of life. As soon as we're out of it, it's just part of the illusion. And I'm at this point, I'm going to step, or maybe some people will be shocked at this, but let me tell you this. This is what I think. God isn't interested in justice, right? We say, well, are you saying that God is unjust? I say no. God is neither just or unjust. That justice is the arrangements we make in this dimension of existence to hold things together as well as we can here. Back in 1967 or 68, in Charlottesville, Virginia, a Broadway musical comedy came through. I don't even remember which one it was, but it was the touring company of a Broadway musical comedy. And in this comedy, they had a really terrific comic villain, complete with the black stovepipe hat and the black cape. And he was just so wonderfully malicious for this whole thing. Okay, so my wife and I were sitting in the front row of the auditorium. And then when the play was over, and then after a while, the cast came out for their curtain calls, right? And so first, the hero and heroine came out, and the cheer went up, yeah! And then the supporting actors and actresses came out, and yeah! And then the villain came out into the spotlight, and silence. And since I was sitting on the front row, I mean, it was just like tense, like you felt this palpable, dense silence. And of course, I'm sure it didn't last long, but to me, it seemed like time stretched out. So it seemed like it went on for several seconds, maybe a couple of seconds. But then all of a sudden from behind me, I heard literally like a collective gasp, like, just like a whole people taking in a breath at once, collectively. And then I began to hear scattered pockets of applause. And then the applause got louder and louder. And then people were on their feet and cheering. Okay. So, but that little segment there, where they still were in the action of the play and they thought this guy was a terrible person. And then to see that shift where they woke up, which is what it like. Now, that is what the near-death experiences is from the point of a lot of the things that we call justice. I've interviewed probably very conservatively 300 people who were murderers. More realistically, probably about 400, because I've just been fascinated with homicide in medical school. I started going to the forensic pathology things and all. So this is fascinating to me. But I'm not going to go so far as to, I just don't know about murder or these horrible big crimes. But I'm talking about for the average thing, the average way that most of us are, things that we regard as terrible, just terrible things here, as soon as you're over that divide, it assumes an entirely different demeanor. I think even in life, you see this a little bit. I know that people are regarded as terrible villains when they were, at the time I was interrelated with them. Then the time goes by. Then you look back at it and then you say, oh, that was a great learning experience, right? So without endorsing mass murder, I mean, I just don't know. But in terms of the average things that most of us encounter, God isn't interested in justice. What God is interested in is how we have learned to love, whatever we were given. But when people are making up their mental picture of the afterlife, they take elements of this life and project them into the afterlife, right? And one of the big things people do is project the justice system into the afterlife. But as soon as you do that, as soon as you make that crossover into the notions of heaven and hell, you take it right out of the realm of justice and into the realm of nonsense. Because let me explain. The image we all have of justice is the lady with the blindfold and the scales, right? And so what that means is that a balance or a scale is a necessary part of the notion of justice. Even Aristotle sort of pointed that out. So this notion of a measure or a scale. Well, now take about, let's say you live 80 years here on life or on the earth or whatever, just to take an outsized figure. And so what? You're going to tell me that because of some infraction you do in the 80 years you're here, that you are going to suffer an endless torment of hell for eternity, billions upon endless billions of eons, and it's usually an ideological infraction, right? It's not like you kill a murder, it's something like you don't believe in Jesus or in this or in some particular doctrine of the person who's putting on this, and you're going to hell. Well, I just can't take that seriously. I mean, I just, that is just beyond ridiculous to say that somebody could be tortured for infinity for making the cognitive lapse of a theological error while you didn't get your Bible interpretation exactly right. So you're going to end in an endless torment. It's just ridiculous. And so, one other notion about that is very interesting. It's like you can see very plainly that the notion of hell is incoherent. Yes, it brings up images in our mind and it may make us feel in certain ways, but in terms of the cognitive content, there's nothing to it. Let me show you. Think of the ordinary use of language called a curse, right? Like, damn it, or go to hell, or whatever, okay? A curse. And it's an outburst of energy, right? So that's one, and it's a common use of language. You hear it all the time. Now, here's another common use of language, is a place description, right? You can describe how your own Rome looks, or your backyard, right? So we have in our mind, we have a curse, which is an outburst, and then we have a description of a place. And so what somebody who has the notion of hell is, they try to put those together. A place that is a curse, that you're cursed to. That doesn't make any sense. And yet it's astonishing to me how many people, that sort of their whole view of the afterlife is a reward punishment system. I think that's ridiculous if you ask me. One other thing, and I want to stop now so we can talk, but one of the really interesting things, if you read about the history of hell, you will find that the hell in the early Christian tradition was regarded as, hold on to your hats, entertainment. No kidding. It's like you can, even in the medieval iconography, you can see this. You see the people suffering down in hell because they didn't believe in the Trinity or whatever. And then in these galleries all around them, you see the saved, the elect in heaven, are looking down and joyfully contemplating the agony of their fellow human beings who just got slipped up on the Bible a little bit. And like, you see what I'm talking about? It's just so ridiculous. And so God is not in justice. And I want to stop at this point and just say, let's open this up. And sorry I got carried away there, but.
So Raymond, we have a lot of questions in the chat. So why don't we start with those? And then if we still have time left over, we can take them directly from people who are listening. So let me find, okay, this is from Jerry. In today's reading, Raymond says, God loves tuning into our life stories. Several pages later, he says, God co-participates in every life story. Ask Raymond how God co-participates.
Well, I think that, I'm not sure God does every single relationship, although if I had to guess, I would say yeah. But sometimes you see this absolutely. Like in the story I told, weeks ago about my friend BR. I mean, my wife and I needed an electrician. We prayed to God to send us the right electrician. The next day, a guy called out of nowhere. He's like, yeah, returning our call. We haven't made any calls this morning, BR. What's this all about? I'm an electrician. Okay, so, God was involved in that. God, what else can you say? That God saw these things and put them all together. That's how I experience. Now, and whether God co-participates in every one of our relationships, I don't know, but I know that I've experienced in many cases. So sometimes he does, whether he does, I suspect he does always, or I hate to use that word he, but I suspect God participates in all of our relationships, but that part I'm not sure on yet.
Thank you, Raymond. Yinglang Wang asks, do you think there is such a thing as soul age?
That is I don't know. It's interesting that you do meet certain people in your mind and your life who just seem so far above mature, any level of maturity that we can experience, and they just seem so wise. I've met people like that in my life. My friend Vi Horton, that I treasure so deeply, she was like that. It was like she had of course, she had a near-death experience, I guess, which would sort of halfway account for it. But I don't know.
Nancy asks, isn't karma partially about justice?
Yeah, this is interesting.
So how do you address that?
Yeah, I don't know much about karma. I mean, in terms of the religious background and all, but I see in terms of life, that's how it works. And it's you see, instead of punishment or reward, I see it like education. I mean, let's say that I really hurt somebody. I am never going to be completely healed again or whole again until I understand what I did from that other side of it. I mean, that's just, to me, the idea that you're being punished is ridiculous, because the best kind of education is to see it for yourself. And to me, that's what karma is all about. And whether, yeah, it can be displaced down, well, you sort of need to work on this in the next life. I sort of suspect that something like that happens. Yeah, I mean, I've heard this from people with near-death experiences. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Another question from Eve. What about suicide? What about the one who takes their life and also the ones who were around and did not manage to save the person who took their life? So how do you see suicide in all of this?
Suicide, I've learned about from many, many patients and also from my own personal experience of suicide attempt. And also just from a lot of reflection and reading the philosophers who've written on it and so on. And this is my take. I've talked to lots of people who had their near-death experiences as a result of a suicide attempt. And to get right to it, this is what I think about suicide, and that is that every single adult human being that I know well enough to know to make this judgment about them is committing suicide. Right? It's like my wife is doing it with her cell phone going down the highway. I have friends who are drinking themselves to death. I have friends who are smoking themselves to death. I myself am going on the cholesterol round. See, so I don't know anybody that I don't know, that I know very well who's an adult who's not committing suicide. I mean, what's the big deal? You're going to think, well, God is standing there at the entranceway and he says, well, you took 30 minutes by pills, you go to hell. Okay, now you took 30 years with cigarettes, you get a breakout. That's ridiculous. See what I'm talking about? It's not a matter of time. So what I say is that it's all the people out of the, I guess, dozens and dozens of people that I've talked with who had near-death experiences as a result of their suicide attempts say, I would never do it again. Why? Because I felt like I would go to hell? No. Because they say this woke them up to the fact that they would see the unfolding of that action and how it affected their loved ones, you see. So that's the reason for not doing suicide. And another reason is like my friend Milton Friedman, sort of had this same sort of point of view. And he was, talking about how, this whole
Screen
world,
sharing.
the whole world is on a suicidal tear right now. But what people say is it's kind of like walking out of the movie when it's halfway done. It's like that people say as soon as they go over to the other side, they regret doing the suicide. And that even when times are tough, you're learning stuff. It's like Milton said, it's like walking out of the movie halfway through. You're not going to know how the movie came out.
Raymond, we have some more questions for you. Elizabeth asked, what is your favorite book about near-death experiences besides your own?
Well, I actually don't read books about near-death experiences. My first, the one that I just come immediate to my mind are Plato's Republic and Plato's Phaedo. In the real world, it's like people, it's like when they get into the afterlife thing, there's a lot of admixture of fantasy in with it, and people don't want to let go of the fantasy side of it. But for me, I think reality is so much more fascinating than my fantasies. So, but
Raymond, aren't you excited about the book by Dr. Hagen? What is it called?
Oh yes.
What's the name of that?
A really good book is The Science of Near-Death Experiences. It's edited by John Hagen, who's a dermatologist, I guess, the editor of the Missouri Medicine. It's the University of Missouri Press. So there are good books, but what I'm talking about here is that, whenever you're getting into this whole issue of life after death, there's always got to be a storyline connected with it. Plato said that very beautifully in the Phaedo. He said, because the notion itself is kind of obscure, you've got to have a story just to get thought of it started. And they had the same ones we do. Like, yeah, I almost died and I got out of my body, or I walked into the parlor the other night and there was Aunt Alekia, who had died 5 years ago. I mean, these are common human stories and experiences. But Plato said that the stories always leave us unsatisfied.
Mhm.
And I've noticed with people who are very interested in near-death experiences, for example, it's like when they just get involved in the inspiring stories. And oh my God, I've heard thousands of these things. I can't wait to hear the next one. See what I mean? So yes, the stories are inspiring and all. And at the same time, if you just stay at that level on it, it's just like hearing the same kind of story over and over again. It inspires some people. To me, that discontent that's left over, that you want more, the craving for more stories, what causes that is the fact that people don't have a set of concepts that they can bring to it. And what nails it down to, which sort of stabilizes it where you can get a handle on it more, is to have some sort of concepts. And sadly, people, well, I'll just talk about me. The context I bring to it is that I realized when I was a kid even, or as a 18-year-old undergraduate, that you can't think about life after death. This is the reality. You can't think about life after death with the logic we have and the mind we have. And so in order to resolve that problem, you can. It's very easy to do. I mean, it's if you just take the time. But the reason why many people don't want to go through that process is that it takes them away from the stories. See?
So Raymond, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's the point, though.
I'm
You can actually think about it in a new way.
Well, I wanted to just segue because there was a question about the stories, and I wanted to make sure we get everyone's questions in
Yes.
today. And I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you think this is from Whitney, do you think we're all living inside God's mind while we're in this earthly dimension, and that God is learning along with us as he experiences our stories and actions? So I just wanted to ask that while you were
I
wrapping
don't
up.
know about the second part. That's a good question, whether he's learning or whether God is learning. But in terms of the first part, I would say absolutely yes, that everything there is inside God. Although the language is obviously, we can't, but that's the thought. Yeah, that everything is inside God, in my view.
Beautiful. Here's one from Jan. I think the story of believing many deserve to be in hell, except ourselves, is a hellish existence. Heaven is a state of mind, seeing the beauty in other souls and not fixated on ourselves, except for betterment for our ability to love unconditionally. What does Raymond think about this definition of heaven and hell?
Say it one more time, the first part.
Yeah. Do you want me to repeat all of it?
Yeah, the
I
first
think,
part is what I missed.
yeah, I think this story of believing that many deserve to be in hell
Yes.
is about ourselves.
Yeah.
A hellish existence or state
It
of
is.
being, right?
It is. That's right. I just think that's right. It's like it seems to me that the people who are so fixated on hell that it's basically spite. It's like I don't like this person because they disagree with my religious aims, so therefore they're going to hell. mean, it's just that simple, I think, just a very crude psychological mood. And to impute that to God, to me, I mean, God has a good sense of humor. I'm sure he sees the humor in it too. But I mean, to me, it's just so ridiculous.
I love this question from Mary. Is God craving our stories the way we crave NDE stories?
I don't know, and that's such a great one. I don't know. I mean, it does seem to me that God is involved with our stories. It does. And you know, you think about all the classic ways people think about God. It's always in turn. I wasn't religious, but you just from the living in the society, you pick up some of the stories like Noah and the, you know, those basic stories. But I feel there's ways to relate to God that don't necessarily involve story. Just experience is one of them. Just to have an experience of being in the presence of God. But then it becomes a story, right? Unless you don't want to tell it. Some of the old mystics say that really you shouldn't even talk about it. And I can see that point of view, but at the same time, I think it's all right to talk about your experiences with God.
All right, Stephanie, do you think people, when they lose a loved one, forget the relationship still continues? Meaning that we don't continue the relationship. So do you think people, when they lose a loved one, forget that the relationship still continues? Meaning that, yeah.
This is just so fascinating, and I don't know. I mean, the way we want to see it is that, you know, we have the relationships we do forever. And people with near-death experiences say when you get to the end of that tunnel, there are all your dead relatives. And you know, so, but at the same time, it's just very puzzling to me. I mean, if I think of it personally, I am sick and tired of Raymond Moody. I don't want to be Raymond Moody anymore. And so what's the big deal that I've got to go over there and be Raymond Moody still? I mean, that's just a horrifying thought to me. So to me, it would be a great blessing to have your identity sort of culminated at the point of death and putting it in a little, and yet, and then I'm also stuck on, I've sort of reached the point where I assume there is reincarnation, not from, I'll talk about that sometime, but it's my experience with was my kids. And because of the way that I had observed them so closely, I knew full well that they had not, you know, that this was not stuff they had been exposed to. I mean, you know, my wife and I don't even go to church. We're afraid of snakes. And down here in Alabama, that was a joke, folks. And so, you know, they haven't been exposed to this, but both of them, my two younger ones, have related in ways that we could not deny. I mean, that it's astonishing. Things that they alluded to and mentioned that they couldn't possibly have known about, as you say. But so I've kind of accepted that there's reincarnation, and at the same time, I wonder about what the personal identity is, right? Like, it's like if grandma, if you see grandma in the Psychomanteon, is there a sense in which she's also reincarnated somewhere in Nebraska? See what I'm getting at? And so I don't know, but they're certainly very thought-provoking questions.
Raymond, Joseph has been very patient waiting to ask you a question directly, Joseph Summer.
Hi,
So,
Joe.
go ahead.
Well, the things you've been talking about really,
Is he unmuted? Go ahead, Joseph.
you struck a chord very resoundingly with me. And it took me back to the days when I was your TA. And
Yeah.
I believe you were the one who told the students, we're all just sitting here dying.
Uh-huh.
And there was one student in particular that sort of was more thoughtful and approached me after the class and said, what do you think heaven is? What do you think heaven what's it like? And I just looked at him and I said, I think we bring a lot to heaven. Whatever your concept of it is, I think we bring a lot to it. And you're talking about the suicide concept. Made me think of my grandfather who committed suicide, and it was because he lost his mobility and was no longer functioning well, and I totally respect that. And it took a long time to grieving, but there's a concept of, instead of taking your life, you're giving your life. If you're no longer helping your family in any way.
That's right.
There are some people who think that, you know, it could be looked at in a positive perspective. And every person and student and friend I've ever met who had an NDE and was able to share it with me, they trusted me enough, I get a contact high.
Yes. Yes.
Feels kind of a feeling about it. And it gives me a razor sharp ability to pick out the bullshit in the world of people pretending or making money on something versus telling it from their heart.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's beautiful, Joseph. Yeah, a contact high. That's exactly what it described. And you know, Joseph, that's so brilliant. I was thinking, when I think back to George Ritchie, the first time I ever heard this from a living person, a contact high, that's what it was. It is. That's fascinating.
Yeah, Ken Ring, researcher Dr. Ken Ring talks about for researchers working with NDEers, it's like a benign virus. You know, it's contagious, and it's something that we are deeply affected by. I have been also. Thank you, Joseph. We have a couple more questions here that I'd like to get to. How about Elizabeth? How can people have a direct experience of God, in your opinion?
I don't know, but I know they can, because I did. And I mean, I just give up. You know, there's a part of it that I haven't talked about because it sounds negative, but there is a darkness to it. And that sounds so chilling, but no, it's not like that. It's just the most wonderful and encompassing darkness to it. And recently I've been reading about this in the context of mystics who say that same thing. You know, one mystic that I'm really sort of getting very fascinated by is Meister Eckhart. And I was reading some things of Meister Eckhart the other day that it's what I was saying to you earlier. He said, you know, to say that God exists or to say that God doesn't exist is equally absurd, because, you know, God is so much bigger than the human concept of existence. And so there is this luscious, comforting, sweet, intense darkness to it. And people look at that and, oh, how horrible. No, it's the most wonderful thing. And I guess what it alludes to is what Eckhart was saying, is that it's part of it. It has to do with the incomprehensibility of God, right? And we sort of take that part as a darkness, but it's not an unpleasant darkness. It's the most wonderful, encompassing darkness. And then this intense light on the top of it. I mean, it's just amazing. So yeah, people can have a direct experience of God, but like I'm showing here very dramatically, when somebody asks you to describe it, you have to give up, right? But it's memorable. Let's put it this way.
You know, Raymond, we have a little more than just a little bit, like 5 minutes left. So I wanted to get to some of these questions because they're so good. This is from Greg. My burning question of all times is that if a person is the worst of all racists and has an NDE and sees the other side, do they return back with love and compassion for
Yes.
everyone?
Yeah.
He's working, I think this is really great. He's working on a book for the spring about near-death experiences and racism. So, what have you discovered?
Yeah,
about
yeah,
that?
absolutely, absolutely. It's that's one that obviously, since I'm from the South, I heard that one a lot from people with
Mm.
near-death experiences, that they had prejudices before, and then when they had this near-death experience, they came back and saw the total irrelevance of it.
Mm.
As a matter of fact, one of my best friends is, and I've heard the same comment from others, but this this one friend of mine, the first person I ever heard it from, she said that people are not don't have a color on the other side. That it's there's not that identification of race, which is that's another one of those things that seems so real to some people from within this context, and yet from the other context, just evaporates.
Raymond, one person wanted to know that if you thought that things like ayahuasca or other sacred medicines are a good way to experience God. What are your thoughts about those as vehicles for the experience of God?
I don't know. I mean, I'm open to that. I mean, it's just to tell you the truth. I mean, a lot of times I've heard people talk about their psychedelic experiences, and I can't shake the feeling that there's a certain amount of pretentiousness to it. But that's, a minority. But I hear other people who seem like it's. But I just don't know. I mean, to me, it's not at all implausible that people could have a profound experience of God when they were intoxicated by a substance. I remember one of the early letters I got in the 70s was from a young woman who told me that she and her brother had been intoxicated with what I forgot, some substance that was popular then. And she said that her near-death experience took place in that sign. So she had a near-death experience that was induced by the close call with death connected with her intoxication. But so, I mean, yeah, I think it's possible. To me, I'm just too, I mean, from what people describe of their psychedelic experiences, sounds to me pretty much like the way I experience the world anyway. So I once asked my dad, who was very liberal, he was a surgeon. And back when the LSD came in, and I asked him, I said, what it's like I'm thinking about taking LSD. What do you think? And I saw the wheel steering. He was thinking about it. He had read a little bit about it, but his considered judgment, he said, well, no, I think that you're psychedelic enough already. And I think that was correct. I see he made the good judgment. But I certainly don't condemn it.
Matter of fact, Raymond did a wonderful interview with Rachel Harris, who is a researcher in ayahuasca. She wrote the book Listening to Ayahuasca, and she had a shared death experience while she was doing a journey one time, and she shared what she saw were the overlaps between ayahuasca and shared death and near-death experiences.
Yeah.
So Listening to Ayahuasca is a wonderful book if you want to know more about it. And also there is an interview with Rachel Harris and Raymond. And if you're interested in that interview, pop me an email. All right, so we are at 2:00, everyone. Thank you so much for spending this Saturday with us. And Raymond, sending you kisses from Asheville, North Carolina.
Thank you all so much for this. Thank you all so much for doing this with me. I'm just enjoying it so much, and I hope that you enjoy it.
Absolutely. And remember, send more questions if you like. And in the subject line, just put question for webinar. We'll address it first thing next month. More excerpts will be on the way about the 12th of the month next month. And have a beautiful Saturday, everyone. Stay safe. Stay well. Bye-bye.